what gets thrown at you. You just gotta keep moving forward. And if something happens and you get, knocked backwards or knocked down, you just got to get up and you just got to keep going, because life's not going to sit around and wait for you. Life is going to keep moving, and you just have to get up and keep going. As
I
hard
love
as
that.
it is.
Yep.
And
Now tell us a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you come from? Where'd you grow up? And what kind of lifestyle did you have coming up?
so my dad was in the Air Force. He retired when I was 15. And so from age birth to 10, we moved all over the place. At age 10, my dad got stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City, and we never moved again. We just stayed here. It became our home, and so Oklahoma's what I consider home, even though I lived all these other places beforehand. So I grew up a military brat. I love that. Growing up on Air Force bases, military bases, I think is an advantage in life, because you grow up with everybody, so it doesn't matter who your neighbor is. If they like the same stuff, you were hanging out with them. And I absolutely love that was my childhood. And then I met my wife. We had a child rather young, but we have been married for 28 years now. We have 3 adult children. The parents to 2 dogs, got 2 fur babies. And I joined the Army National Guard, or the Oklahoma National Guard, when I was 19, I think it was, where I was in for 2 years. And then I went active duty because we were getting married, and my job at the convenience store was not going to feed my family. So that leads me to about 97. I can keep going on if you want. Uh-oh.
No, well, I mean, let's hop back, because let's hop back a little bit.
Okay.
As a child, if you were moving around a lot, like for me, when I grew up in an abused household. So for me, my solace was books and learning, and because I didn't make a lot of friends because we moved a lot. So
Right.
is that was something you got into, books a lot, or were you a sports guy?
I was both. When I was a kid, when we were stationed in Abilene, Texas, there were these 2 kids that were like 2 years older, and all they did was organize sports activities. So from about first grade on, we would play baseball, we would play football, we would play wall ball, just all sorts of stuff. But at the same time, I loved reading as well. So I was always having my mom take me to the library and checking out books on various things. I think that was probably some of my ADHD, because I would hyper focus on a topic and get 20 books on that particular thing. And so I kind of did both. And sort of to piggyback on what you were saying about moving a lot, in the military, people tend to move around the same time. So the people you ended your school year with weren't necessarily the people you started your school year with that following year after the summer, because everyone, or, a third of your friends would move over the summer. That's just the way it was. So I got really good at meeting people, because so many new kids were coming in, you had to, or you were the new kid and you had to learn how to meet people. The problem is I don't necessarily enjoy it. I know that sounds weird, but sometimes meeting a large group of people at once can be overwhelming for me.
All right. So because you mentioned it, and I was going to ask it earlier anyway, um, I have a son on the spectrum. He's Asperger's. He's high functioning Asperger's, and
Mm-hmm.
so back then we really didn't even know what the hell a spectrum was, and
Right.
so were you ever, as an adult, diagnosed on the spectrum with anything besides ADHD?
I have not been. Of course, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I was a hyperactive, annoying kid in the 1970s. There wasn't even a term for it except for hyperactivity. And but my son is on the autism spectrum. He also has Asperger's. And that's kind of one of the things I like to talk about is my son has a very, very successful career. He was in the Air Force. He did satellite operations. He used to be one of about 50 people on the planet that could pilot a GPS satellite. And he was so good at it that he briefed the vice president about GPS satellites. And then he was asked to go and give a speech to both members of Congress and the Joint Chiefs of Staffs about what GPS satellites do. So don't let being on the spectrum slow you down. You can, do some pretty cool things even being on the spectrum. So
for me, as being, a dad, I've noticed things, and now I notice it more because I'm more cognizant and I'm
right.
using my, reticulator activating system. But even when I watch people like the guy that owns Tesla, even when I watch Mark Zuckerberg, there's things, their mannerisms, I can tell they're if 80 to 90% that they're going to be on the spectrum. And
Yeah.
some of the most successful people, even like Bill Gates, you could tell that there's something that they're on the spectrum and they're using it as their superpower instead of
Right.
using it as an excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's definitely true. I can watch like YouTube videos and see the people on the video and I'm like, they have ADHD. They don't. They're probably on the spectrum just from, my life and then that type of stuff. So yeah, no, I've noticed that as well.
All right. So now tell us, a little bit about your military. Your dad, you said your dad was Air Force. You joined the Army. So take us back to the recruiting station. Tell us your recruiting story and why you decided to join the Army National Guard.
Okay. So I basically recruited myself. There's never been a recruiter that had an easier time recruiting somebody than me. When I was in high school, when I was in ninth grade, my parents divorced. My mom was going to college full time, and I started taking over cooking dinner for the family at that point. And I really loved cooking a lot. And I decided I wanted to be a chef. Well, back in the late 80s, early 90s, it's not like today where every VOTEC and every school has a culinary school, that can teach you to be a chef. Back then, there were like 3 places in the US where you could go to school to become a chef, and they were all very expensive. And they were mostly 2-year programs. But if you had been a cook in the military, it was a 1-year program and half as much because the first year you already know because you learned it in the military. So I was like, well, I'm just going to go and be a cook in the military and save myself a year and like $20,000. So I went to the recruiter, took my test, enlisted in the National Guard, went to culinary school. And I know that there's always the thought that military cooking sucked, but it did not when I was in. We cooked everything from scratch. I don't know if they do that now, but when I was in, we cooked it all from scratch. I have cracked well over 100,000 eggs in my life. And then I went active duty because, like I said earlier, I was getting married, needed to support my kids. And then I realized I don't like cooking for people. I like cooking for my family, but I don't like cooking for people I don't know. So I'm glad that I was a cook in the military because had I gone to culinary school, I would have had, $40,000 in student loan debt to discover I didn't like something. And I got to serve my country at the same time.
Now, this is from 92 to what, 97?
97. Yep. And
now,
so
is this about the time when the Oklahoma City bombing happened?
Yes, I was actually active duty when that happened. My mother-in-law actually worked in one of the high rises about 2 blocks away from the Murrah building, and they thought a plane had flown into the building. She said that building shook and it terrified everybody, and everybody sort of ran to the windows. And there was a certain point where the windows above the other towers all broke and started shattering from the shockwave from the blast. And my mother-in-law, she said that was just like the scariest, weirdest thing she's ever gone through in her life. Her car was parked in a lot across the street from the Murrah building, and it actually, the concussion waved her roof and her hood and all of that stuff. It was wavy afterwards. It literally stretched the metal and caused waves on it. And so that was definitely a rough time to get to come home, or they let me come home just to make sure everything was all right. But yeah, that was not a fun time for Oklahoma City.
And unfortunately, I'm a big history buff. I love history, and a lot of people, they don't know their histories because if it's not on Facebook or Instagram, they don't know about it. So,
right.
But for me, just knowing that two people that raised their right hands to protect this country are the ones that actually did that. It kind of shook me to my core at when that happened. I'm like, wait a minute, this could be some dude I could have shared, ate at a chow hall with, shot hoops with, hung out with a bar, hang out and partied, and realizing that somebody like that can do something to our country that's totally what we don't stand for. We're total opposite.
Yeah. Yeah. It was crazy just to think about, how they did that and why they did that. And I still don't think I quite understand it, even though living here in Oklahoma, we know a little more, I think, than the average people do. But yeah, I don't get that at all either. I feel like that's
and I'm actually going to introduce you to one of my best friends. His name is Brian Paul. He's out of Oklahoma. He actually helps veterans and first responders struggling with PTSD and addiction issues. So I'm going to hook you guys up because you guys are right. You guys are in the same, in the same neighborhood. So now talk to us, okay, it's 96, 97. You've done your, whatever, 4 years. Did you decide a couple years in that this is not for me? And did you plan to get out? Or was it just something you talk to your wife and be like, I'm done, honey. I need to get out.
Once again, so I was actually considering re-enlisting, and I was going to change my MOS because I knew at that point I hated cooking for other people. And I was going to change my MOS, and I started the process of re-enlisting, and I was going to go to MP school. Once again, I chose another MOS where you don't get any time off on holidays. But so in 96, I don't know if you recall, in 96, Saddam Hussein moved like 20,000 troops to the Kuwaiti border. Yep. And so they thought that he was going to reinvade Kuwait. And so they sent 5,000 of us from Fort Hood to go and stop him. And I was over in Kuwait when I just decided after that I just didn't want to be in the army anymore. It wasn't anything about Kuwait. I actually had fun when I was in Kuwait. It led to what I believe might be one of the funniest stories of thinking an invasion has started in the history of the world. I was out with my line unit, and all of a sudden everybody starts freaking out because they have this massive, massive radar signature of stuff coming over to us. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm the tip of the spear. This thing is starting. So everybody starts running. I was the gunner for the first sergeant. So I'm, going over to where the first sergeant is. I get in there, and just when I get up, into the back of that Hummer, all of a sudden it comes over the radio that, everybody stand down. It's just a giant herd of camels. So that's as close as I ever got to seeing combat, was a buttload of camels. But yeah, so I liked parts of being in the Army, and then there were other parts of it that I just didn't like. And I think I had just got so burned out on the crappy hours of being a cook that I think it just sort of soured me at the time. So it was kind of both.
All right. So before we get into it, I want to talk about your transitioning and then what you're doing now.
Yeah.
I want to thank our sponsors. As you guys know, I was in the military for over 23 years. And also I was with GNC for over 30. I always loved pre-workouts, but they always tasted like ass. So I came out with my own Vertical Momentum Resiliency Coffee. It's twice the amount of caffeine, twice the amount of energy, zero crash. It's all veteran, hand roasted. and 100% of the proceeds go to help veterans struggling with homelessness and PTSD issues. So if you like high velocity coffee and you want to help save veterans' lives, just write coffee down below. Also, guys, since I started drink, I get high on my own supply. Yes, I do drink my own coffee. I stopped using sugar about 3 months ago. My friend has a company called Buzzy Bees Honey. He's actually a beekeeper, which is friggin' cool. I think it's cool. And I've been using it instead of sugar and natural and artificial sweeteners. My blood sugar has dropped 180 points, and I've lost 12 pounds so far using Buzzy Bees Honey. So if you guys love honey, just write it down below, and I'll get you that information. So, brother, the reason why I started this show is because now I think you're my 555th interview, something stupid. But I find that when veterans get out, not all the time, not maybe in your case, but a lot of us, when we get out, we don't have a mission anymore. We don't have the camaraderie. We don't have a paycheck. And a lot of us come home, especially if they went outside the wire, a lot of us come home with some issues, mental health issues. And a lot of us, we know, because like my friend Sergeant Nick Valentine says from Fort Hood, once you step off the base, the military doesn't give a shit about you. And your phone stops ringing, and you're a man or a woman on an island. So what was your transitioning like? What was your story like?
So when I got out, I actually had a job lined up. My mom worked for a company and they had a warehouse position open. And so I actually did a telephone interview before I moved, or before I got out from Fort Hood and moved back to Oklahoma City. And my wife, when we lived in Fort Hood, worked in the pawn shop industry, and she had a friend that worked for a company here in Oklahoma City. And so she was able to get a job within a couple days of us moving back. Now, where we had maybe it wasn't difficulty, but we didn't have an actual place to live when we first moved back. So we stayed with my mother and father-in-law for about 2 months because my dad and my stepmom had a rental house, and that's where we were going to move into. But that person wasn't moving out for a couple months. So we were lucky that we had family support. And that's one of the things that I've just been blessed with my entire life and my marriage with my wife. We have always had family that has helped us when we needed any type of help. And so I feel like I was lucky because I didn't have that fear of, oh my gosh, what am I going to do when I get out, and not having, money and stuff like that. So I got out, took a week off of work, and then went and started working in a warehouse.
All right. So, let me ask you, being a parent, like for me, I have ADHD. For me, for when I was a child, back in 70s, you were just dumb. You were just a stupid kid. But now I know about teaching modalities that help everybody learns from a different way. Some are hands-on, some are from the book. But now I recognize that as an ADHD parent, I can recognize it in my children. Did you notice that because of what you went through? Were you able to cope with it a lot easier?
So my all three of my kids are on some sort of spectrum. My oldest daughter and then my youngest child both have ADHD. And then my son has autism, Asperger's. My oldest daughter, on the other hand, she was a difficult child to deal with. And she also had one of the sort of side effects of ADHD, which is called oppositional defiance disorder. So a lot of times she was always seemed to be doing something where she was getting in trouble. So I failed as a parent to recognize her ADHD when I should have noticed it. And with my son, we just didn't recognize at the time some of the signs of Asperger's because he is really high functioning. He talks to people. He's loves to read books. Dude's great at video games. And so he just sort of seemed normal, but he didn't like, group settings and whatnot. But we thought he may be on the spectrum. But we always just treated him just like you would treat anybody else, because we didn't want him to feel like he was being held back in any way. And then Emily, my youngest child, that poor kid has just had a lifetime of medical issues. When she was born, she was having an asthma attack. She has ADHD. She has OCD. She had a kidney disorder that required surgery to be fixed when she was 5. She's been hospitalized a good 12 times from having asthma attacks where her pulse ox was below 90, which is not a good thing. And so she's had 3 surgeries on her nose. And so because she was always not feeling good, she didn't have a lot of the sort of the ADHD symptoms, because she was always either sick or on medication. Because of her kidney thing, she was on antibiotics for over 2 years. And by the time she had her surgery, they kept an antibiotic at the pharmacy only for her. Because, antibiotics lose some effectiveness over time. But we also figured, as she kind of started getting healthier, okay, she has ADHD, because her and I are so similar. We get together and our ADHD like merges, and we form this ADHD smart aleck thing that drives my wife insane. We used to joke that we should have a reality show called Two Cool People in a Grump, because my wife would try to tell us something, and then her and I would go off on these ADHD tangents, and she would just sit there watching us like, can you guys stop now, please? But as an adult, and now that she, until last year, was basically healthy, you can definitely see all of the ADHD in her. She has all of the major symptoms for it. And she's actually on, I think she's on medication for it. She currently has quite a few medications that she has to take due to last year, which we'll get into here in a few minutes, I'm assuming.
Yep. So now, for me, I see a lot of adults, because now I'm a parent and my kids are getting older, but I still have an 11-year-old. I still see, like, if a child is on the spectrum, and they say, like, my son, he's going to college to be a marine biologist. His thing has always been animals ever since he's been a baby. But instead of saying, because you see a lot of parents, stop looking at them animal books and whatever. We kind of enforced it. We're like, go for it. If this is what you love to do, dig deep. Even like Gary Vaynerchuk says, I don't like to curse on the show, but it's my show. I can do what I want. He says, fuck what you're not good at. Triple down on what you really love. And I think a lot of parents, we need to start saying, all right, my kids, maybe they're not the greatest at sports. Great. What are they good at? What do they like to do? Let's triple down on that instead of trying to make them into our own image. Right? What are your thoughts?
I agree with you 100% on that. My oldest daughter, for example, she wanted to do soccer one year, which is fine. So we let her do soccer. And then about halfway through the season, she was like, I don't like soccer. And the only thing we told her was, you made a commitment to the team. You're the starting goalie. So you're going to finish the season. If you never want to do soccer or any other sport again, we are not going to make you do that. But somewhere around 14, she got to where she started liking cutting people's hair and doing stuff like that. So we knew for her that going to college was not the ideal situation. But she did go to a hair academy, which is one of the more expensive, better hair academies here in Oklahoma City. And that's what she does now. But she's so good at it. She's actually now an instructor herself on teaching how to do hair. And when we realized, hey, you know what? She would just be wasting her time going to college. We tried to encourage her, if this is what you want to do it. Because if you go to college, you're just not going to be happy. do what you want to do that interests you. And as you're working in it, you're going to start off, a little bit ahead because you're enjoying what you're doing. And so, and then with my son, he loves computers and all of that stuff. And so he decided that he wanted to work in the space portion of the Air Force. And he took his ASFAB. He was 3 points shy to do satellite testing, which is the second highest scores you need in the Air Force. Number one's nuclear for some strange reason. But he was upset. And so he studied so he could take the test again so that he could do space operations. And that's what he likes. And that's what he's doing now in the civilian world. And he loves it, other than he has odd hours because that's a 24/7 job. I don't know what he does now. He's not allowed to tell us, but he's making good money and he loves what he does. And it's something that I'm glad we encouraged him to do that because he's happy. And that's all I want out of my, for my kids, is for them to be happy adults that aren't out committing crimes.
Yeah, I mean, but you see a lot of these kids, like my other son. I did a post today. We went to go have parents visit at East Stroudsburg University. He's going to be a freshman there this year, but he's wanting to be an athletic trainer for his whole life, and he's a 3-sport athlete. So of course we're gonna, if it makes you happy, I want you to do it. But I want you to give it 100%. I don't want you half-assing it, because that means you really don't love it. And I don't want to push you, like for you to join the military because I was there. You're going to hate it, and you're going to waste all those years. So I'd rather you do something you love. But I'm going to tell my kids, make sure that you're giving it all you got. Because you're not going to be really successful in life if even Santa says nobody loves a half-ass jingler. You know what I mean? So whatever you do, I tell my kids, just give it all you got. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And sort of to step back a little, when my kids had a fascination in something that, as a kid, we would try to give them whatever info they needed to do it. Now, they had it easier than me because, back in our day, we only had encyclopedias and we had to go to the library. Our kids, if there was something they were interested in, it's, hey, let's walk over to the computer, Google. So I was able to feed their interest that way. But I always encouraged, if you like this, learn about it. Learning's good. Learn something new every day. So,
right. And and we're going to talk about what you got going on now. But, we're going to talk about tragedy, and we're going to talk about the triumph, because your family went through something horrific. And I want you to talk to us about that, because a lot of parents, and we just had that school shooting today. There's a shooting. Yeah. I forget where the shooting was at, but three children and 3 adults lost their lives, and other people got hurt, and they're going to be disformed and all this other stuff, and have to go sometimes exactly what you went through and are going through. So take us back to tell us your story. Tell us that story.
Okay. So February 24th of last year, I was recording my podcast, my other podcast, Kenyatta and Jack Save the World. And this tells you how awesome I am. It was my wife's birthday that day, and I completely forgot and didn't reschedule recording. But I can hear my wife in the other room talking on the phone. And I thought, oh, that's cool. The kids, for once, did not forget to call their mom on her birthday. So I finish my podcast. I go in there. I walk into the living room where she's at. And, we've been married for so long. As soon as I walked in, I knew something was wrong. So I said to her, does Emily have an asthma attack? Is she in the hospital for that? And she turned to me and she said, she's in the emergency room. She was in a fire. And my heart just sank, because you hear that and you have no idea at this point how bad it was, what was going on. So long story short, she was making candles. The candle wax exploded, caught her right arm on fire, her right leg on fire. She did what you're supposed to do, what they teach you to do in schools. She stopped dropping, but apparently ceramic tiles do not put you out. Fortunately, it had snowed that day. She got up, ran outside, dove in the snow to put the fire out. As she was about to pass out, her dog came to her and started licking her face, which woke her up, kept her from passing out. She called 911. They take her to the emergency room. Then they're figuring out, is it bad enough to Metaflight her to the burn unit in Denver or ambulance? So it's weird because Metaflight means that her burns are really, really, really bad. Ambulance means they're bad, but not bad enough that it needs a helicopter. So you're torn because you don't want her to be bad enough to be on the helicopter ride, but a helicopter ride is 20 minutes and an ambulance is, 90 minutes. So you have this weird feeling of, which do I want? So, of course, that led to me and my wife going to Colorado. Fortunately, my son, we were able to stay in Colorado Springs because it was cheaper to pay for gas and drive 90 minutes every day than to get a hotel room because we had no idea how long we were going to be there. So she needed third-degree burns, or she had third-degree burns on her right arm and her right leg that required skin grafts. And it changes you being in a room with somebody that is in that amount of pain. If it doesn't change you, I think there's probably something wrong with you, because the amount of pain that she was in, I can't even explain it. There were times where the only thing we could do to help her was just sit there quietly because any sound bothered her. We couldn't even text people because tapping the screen on her phone was overwhelming her. And that was just so hard to see her in that amount of pain. And burns are something where the recovery from it and what they have to do to heal you is every bit as painful as the initial being on fire. And the other thing you're not prepared for is Hollywood gives you a certain view on what burned skin looks like after a fire, and that is not what it looks like at all. I can't explain it. You probably don't want to know, honestly. And so that changed everything for my entire family, because had it not snowed that day, would she have been able to put herself out as quickly as she did? It could have been far worse than 18% of her body, could have been 50. She could have died. And that's just something that has just kind of haunted me since then. And then there was just a couple times where I was in the room with her and she just wanted me to stand next to her while she, put her head in my sort of chest and cried. And that haunts me too. And it has been tough, but this is where it ties in with your podcast. Her resiliency is amazing. She was expected to be in the hospital for a minimum of a month. She got out in 14 days. Now, when you get out, you cannot be on any kind of IV pain med. And you have to do your own wound care when you're at home. Wound care for a burn patient is not fun because you basically have to go in the shower and cut out stuff that's not healing correctly. And she had to do that for a good 4 months and do it all on her own. And her resiliency through this has just been incredible, because she was like, I don't want to be in the hospital. I want to go home. I'm going to do what they tell me to do. And she did everything that they told her to do. And she said later on that, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to cuss here, that she was going to make the fire her bitch. She was going to own it, and she wasn't going to let it sort of ruin the rest of her life. That being said, she's still dealing with the after effects of being burned, because that is a long-term, multi-year healing process. She has some phobias, which I understand. She doesn't like to use the stove anymore because that's where her fire started. People, if you ever see a burn survivor, one thing you have to know is all of their skin grafted area no longer sweats. So they all have thermo regulation issues with their body. They get hot easy, they get cold easy. you just don't realize how much sweating keeps you hot and cool, having those pores there. So that affects her. Where your skin grafted skin and your old skin connect, the skin grafted skin doesn't move like normal skin anymore. So it's always tugging and pulling on your, with your other skin. It's in conflict. It's very itchy where the two connect. And so she's always dealing with that. And she gets really, really tired really easy. But she's not going to let that stop her. She has started, her goal is to get to where she can walk 5 miles, during on a hike or something, so that she has this energy so that she doesn't spend the rest of her life not being able to do things. So we're still working. She's still, going through that. And then the rest of us have we've all started seeing a therapist since then, because it has been mentally tough. But in my opinion, I can't be the person she needs me to be for her if I'm having issues, to where I can't fully be what she needs me to be, or my wife and my other kids for that matter as well. And so having a therapist has just really, really been good for me. And it's been good for all of us. We all have our own therapist now. But yeah, that's it. You can go through something that's horrible like that and you can get through it. You can survive. You can do great. You can still do great things. Now, it may take a while because, like I said, recovery from that is hard. But that kid is resilient. And fortunately, she doesn't listen to podcasts, so she won't get to hear me say that she's my hero.
Well, anybody that's been through a significant trauma, like me with having my head run over and losing my vision, or your daughter, having 18% of her body being burned up, you either get bitter, which you usually do in the beginning, and then you decide to get better.
Right.
And then you take this hold. And like I said, I don't really curse on the show, but it's just me, you listen. Nobody's going to listen anyway. A lot of us get the whole, well, fuck the world. It's me against the world. If this didn't kill me, nothing else is going to kill me. I'm getting my strength. So I'm sure when somebody's, because obviously she's out and about, and somebody talks to her about a little ticky-tack problem, she's probably like, hold on, wait a second. I got burned up 18% of my body, and you're worried about your Facebook going down for a day. It's not a really big issue. So I'm sure she's gotten much stronger mentally, right?
She has. The funny thing is, she has a wicked, dark sense of humor. While she was in the ICU, she leaned over and told us, she said, for the rest of my life, if I ever have a friend that's complaining about a bad breakup, I'm going to respond with, I understand, I've been burned myself in the past. Now, I get that's pretty dark. Yeah. But I felt that dark humor like that was a sign that she was doing okay. And if you don't mind, real quick, my favorite dark humor bit of hers was when she got out of the hospital. She said, Dad, after these last 2 weeks and being in all of this pain, I think I now can understand what a man goes through when he has a cold.
That's the man flu.
Yeah. And I was like,
even like me and my son, we joke around, and he was playing Madden downstairs, and I hear him say, "What are you, blind?" And I yell downstairs, "Yes, I am."
Yes.
Yeah. We make fun of it because that's the way we deal with it. That's the way, it's a coping mechanism. All right. But then, something that me and you, I said, I think we're going to work together. There's like stuff like the Ronald McDonald House. There's all these places, but there's really no places for burn unit and burn victims' families to have the help that, say, like a St. Jude's does or anything like that. And like you said, you're driving back and forth, 90 minutes each way, and you didn't have anybody really to help. So, but now you said you've talked to some people that are going through the same shit as you were, or even worse, right?
Oh, yeah. That's the thing you have to realize when somebody's in a burn unit. You can be in the hospital a year. Easy. Your family can't, you know, quit their jobs and do everything for a year and pay for a hotel for a year. But there's not, even if it's just 2 weeks like M, you know, 14 days at $100 a night at a hotel is $1,400, not to mention the food that you have to eat while you're there. That can get expensive really, really quick. And there's just nothing to really help the families of the burn survivor. And when you're in the unit, going through that alone is just heartbreaking. There were several people in the unit that did not have family when she was in. And it was just so heartbreaking to hear, you know, sort of the pain they were in without having a family member there to be with them. And so I was talking with my wife and I'm like, you know, we need something where people can stay. And then we were like, wait a minute, there's already a model for that, the Ronald McDonald House. So this is like so beginning thoughts or whatever. But that's sort of what I would like to start working on, is a Ronald McDonald type house near burn centers for the families of burn survivors. A good resource is the Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors. They have people in every state that can give you some type of help, because you also need some financial help, because if you're in a burn unit, you are not working and paying your rent and paying your mortgage. And that would suck, to be in the hospital for 4 months and come home and find out you've been evicted or your house is in foreclosure. So there are, the American Burn Association also has resources that you can get that can help you with that. But I really, really want to figure out how to start a Ronald McDonald type situation, so that when people are in the situation we were in, you can have some place to stay and you don't have to worry about the financial impact that it's going to take to do that.
And you've been talking about this on your both your podcasts, right? So you're trying to getting more awareness out there, right?
Yes. The Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, they have a podcast called Girls with Graphs. They both work for the society, but they are also both burn survivors themselves. And their podcast, they talk to other burn survivors. And I had them on as a guest recently. And so they talked about a lot of the services that they offer and then what they've gone through. And, you know, if you see somebody that is a burn survivor, how you can interact with somebody, because, you know, depending on where the burn is, people stare. And so they kind of talked about how you can interact with somebody in that situation. And then I also had another guy on named Andrew, who I've met because of my daughter. And he's a burn survivor who survived an explosion. And his story is quite inspirational. So
now tell us, you know, what you got going on now. Tell us about your podcasts, because now you're a big baller now. So I only got one. So talk to us about what you got going on now.
So I started Musings of an A.D.D Mind because my children started getting on to me about, hey, Dad, you should have a podcast. And I think it's because a lifetime of hyper-focusing with ADHD, I know a lot of crap about a lot of stuff. And I think they were tired of me talking to them about that. And so they wanted me to have an outlet to get all of this information out that I don't think required them listening to me, which is fine because I enjoy the podcast and doing that. So that's what I did. I started this podcast. And one of the things that I wanted to do, as I mentioned way at the beginning, I loved growing up on a military base, but I'm also male and I'm also white. So I reached out to a friend of mine that's female and Black, and I wanted to know if she had the same positive memories of growing up on a military base as I did, because I wanted to have the contrast. And so we had an interview, or I interviewed her, and for the most part, she loved growing up on military bases too. And so I had her on, and her and I had such a great time as being a guest on my podcast. Almost within, it is scary how close our brains work. We decided, hey, let's do a podcast together. And we can talk about things from the viewpoint of we're both, at the time we were closer to 50, growing up with our generation, Gen X, the ignored generation. But we just wanted to be able to talk about things from, hey, this is my viewpoint. What's your viewpoint? Because we just felt that the only way the world is going to get better is if people talk and communicate and not yell at each other. And so that's why we started our podcast called Kenyatta and Jack Save the World. We sort of talk about the current goings on with the news, and we do other things. We find we'll do what we call like a deep dive on a subject. For example, one time we were talking and we were like, why is Haiti in such bad shape? So we did the research and we discovered why Haiti is in bad shape. And some of it is the Haitian people's fault, and some of it's the rest of the world using Haiti as toilet paper. But, but we do other stuff. We've talked about certain historical figures. We talked about a guy named Bass Reeves, who's actually the inspiration for the Lone Ranger. He was a Black U.S. Marshal in the Oklahoma Territories. And he was such an amazing dude that the people that do Yellowstone are doing a spinoff series about him. And so we do all sorts of stuff on that. And then once on Musings of an A.D.D Mind, I try to talk to people who have done stuff that's interesting, because I feel everybody can be inspiring to somebody else at some point in their life, right? We've all gone through something that someone else is going through that's similar.
And I enjoyed thoroughly being on it. I know that our episodes drop somewhere in May. I can't wait to push that out there. And it's nice to be able to be honest and talk, because so much in the social media world, everybody's got a filter. Everybody looks great. Everybody has this beautiful life, and nobody's talking about what they're going through. But we're losing up to 5,000 adolescents a day are attempting suicide, and first responders a day, because they're not talking about stuff that needs to be talked about. And I think that's why my show and your show, they need to be heard. Because even if one person can sit there and go, I never thought about that. Maybe I'm not the only one that struggles with this.
Yeah, like I said, we can all be inspiring to someone else. I honestly believe that. And it can be something lighthearted that someone finds inspiring. For example, one of my guests went to college in Scotland from Oklahoma. People always talk, I want to go to university in Europe. No one ever does that. He did it. So maybe some kid in high school will listen and say, you know what? I want to do that. That's inspiring. I have another friend, and her husband died at 46. And, she's the same age. How do you get through that when you're 46 years old and suddenly a widow and, you have a 9-year-old? But her story can be inspirational to someone else. And the truth of the matter is the world is better with you in it. I know that things can be dark sometime and people do consider suicide, and it's a low point, but it doesn't have to be your last point. The world is better with a person in it. And if I can inspire somebody in some sort of small way to keep moving forward and, put that foot in front of the other, and even if it's just a little tiny step and you make it, you can get out of your low point and be happy.
I love it. So now, where do we find your podcast?
You can find it on most podcasting platforms, Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. There are several more. I can never think of them. I have them all in my, in my phone. And so Musings of an A.D.D Mind drops a new episode every Wednesday. I am currently doing a series on adulting with ADHD. How, as an adult, do you work and survive in a world that's not meant for people with ADHD? I have had 4 people on so far. I have 4 more interviews planned. And then I also have My neurotypical wife interviewed the wife of one of the people I interviewed, because she's also neurotypical, about what it's like to be married to someone with ADHD. And then my other podcast drops every Tuesday, and it's also on all of the same platforms. And that one's sort of changing, because it's more current affairs. And then in the summer on Musings, I'm going to talk a lot of pop culture.
I love it, brother. I also want to say thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your friendship. I love and I appreciate you. And any way that we can help get the word out, especially about, doing this thing for burn victims and their families, we're 100% behind you, and behind you and your daughter and your wife and the kids.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. I know that I'm slightly different than your normal guest is. So I really appreciate you having me on. I've enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed getting to know you and seeing your posts. Honestly, you're the reason I'm on LinkedIn. So, so thank you for that. After talking to you when we did our interview, I was like, I probably should have a LinkedIn. So you've given me a lot of great advice, and I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that we've got to know each other.
All right, brother. Well, have an amazing week. So, guys, make sure you check out his podcast. If you know anybody that's ever struggled with anything with burning or anything like that, share this episode with them. Let them know that they're not alone and that there is help coming. We're gonna put our forces together. There's help coming, guys. You're not alone. All right, Jack, brother, have an amazing week.
You too.
All right, guys. So remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is but up. I love you guys, and I will talk to you tomorrow.